All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. It is just harmless little me here, Dave, the Real Music Observer, observing real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. Heart is back together again. A couple weeks ago, Nancy Wilson sat down for an interview where she admitted that Heart's iconic song, probably their most we'll say their most famous track or the most identifiable track in their catalog, which is Barracuda. The riff was plucked from another band, and that band is Nazareth, a band that they toured with back in the day and hung out around. The tune is called This Flight Tonight, and if you go and listen to it, you will hear some scary similarities between it and Barracuda. The tune was actually written by Joni Mitchell, and Nazareth decided to cover it and put their hard rock stamp on it. Quite amazing because it became Heart's most iconic tune. We've seen this before, of course. Led Zeppelin happened to be hanging out with the band Spirit in the late 1960s, and by the early 70s they had written this tune called Stairway to Heaven, where the chords at the beginning of the song are very similar to those same chords that you hear in the song called Taurus by Spirit. I've researched stuff like this before. Hotel California has some roots in a tune by Jethro Tull, which again has some of the same time signatures and chord changes. Don Felder, who wasn't in the Eagles at that time, certainly was hanging out with the band and may have seen a concert. A very strange double bill, Jethro Tull and the Eagles back in the day. Those things were way more common than they are now, where they try to put two bands that are fairly similar together, or at least have some of the same fan base, possibly. But back in those days, it was just like, hey, man, it's music. We're going. Tull and the Eagles, we're going. So that's how that worked. And, of course, Felder admitted to writing this song while he was hanging out in Malibu at his beach house. So maybe that inspiration lay dormant for a few years before it decided to pop out. What's weird about the Heart song, though, is that these guys are just coming out and saying, hey, we stole this. Just want to let you know, this is our most iconic song. It's been a long time, so we might as well just admit it. We're kind of maybe at the twilight of our career, and we might as well let the fans know exactly where we got the inspiration for the song. Will it hurt the band at all? No, this isn't going to hurt Heart. I'd still rather find out the details of, how they reconciled from their domestic issues from a couple years ago. But this is interesting. It's a nice little deflection away from that other stuff and into the more nuts and bolts of how the music was created. And I think a lot of fans probably appreciate that, to hear how these songs actually came into being. There is quite a bit of plagiarism that happens in music. Journey has a song that I think Kansas ended up pilfering or helping along with Carry On Wayward Son. There's definitely a riff from I'm Gonna Leave You, which shows up in Carry On, and all over the place. You can probably cite numerous examples, and maybe even a few that people don't even know or are aware of. I hear it all the time in music, and I say, gee, this sounds like such and such, and at that point I just keep it to myself until somebody else notices it, and then maybe, there's a dialogue about, hey, wonder if they were hanging out with this particular band back in the 70s or 80s or whenever the similarities seem to cross paths. So anyway, Heart steals a riff, and Nancy Wilson is fine with telling everybody about it. So there you go. Some interesting rock history here on The Real Music Observer. I'm Dave, and I'll be back soon, so long as my voice holds up. See you then.